All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to unpack a really radical theory from Jason W. Moore's book, Capitalism in the Web of Life. Now, his big idea is that almost everything we think we know about capitalism and nature is actually built on a huge misunderstanding. And to get a handle on our ecological crisis, we have to completely change the way we see the problem itself.
We've all heard this one, right? It's the classic story. Humanity on one side, nature on the other. It's the whole foundation for most environmental debates, painting us as this destructive force acting on some passive external world.
In this slide, yet this just lays it out perfectly. We put society, the economy, our cities, all that stuff, into one box. And then we put nature, resources, the wilderness, into a totally separate box. This split, this wall we build in our minds, is so deep we don't even realize we're doing it.
But what if that separation is the very thing that's been blinding us? Moore's work says exactly that. He argues this great divide has made it basically impossible to see how capitalism really works.
So, okay, let's tear this idea down. The first step is to just get rid of those two separate boxes. Instead, we need to think of a single, unified system where society and nature aren't just bumping into each other, they're completely tangled up together. And this new way of seeing things has a name.
He calls it world ecology. And the key idea here is this concept of a double internality. It's not capitalism versus nature. It's capital flowing through nature and nature flowing through capital. Think of it like a single, messy, living metabolism, where you honestly can't tell where one thing starts and the other ends. Because capitalism isn't just about money. It's a way of organizing the entire web of life.
Okay, so if capitalism is a way of organizing nature, what's its main goal? What's the engine that's been humming along for the last 500 years? Well, according to Moore, it's a constant, relentless hunt for one thing: cheap nature. And cheap here doesn't just mean a low price. It means finding and basically taking all the unpaid work that gets done by humans and the rest of the web of life. Think about it. The incredible richness of topsoil that took thousands of years to form, or all the unpaid work of women raising the next generation of workers. Capitalism, in this view, runs on a gigantic, unacknowledged subsidy from all this unpaid work. This whole strategy really breaks down into four key pillars, what Moore calls the four cheaps. You've got cheap labor, cheap food, cheap energy, and cheap raw materials. Every single great wave of economic expansion in history, he argues, was kicked off by finding a new, massive, and low-cost source of these four things. They're the legs of the table holding the whole system up.
And this quote from Marx just nails the cold logic behind it all. It's a logic of pure exhaustion. Capital's goal is to squeeze the absolute maximum output for the minimum input. It doesn't matter if that input is a person's life, a field's fertility, or a forest. Once one source is used up, the system just packs up and moves on to find a new frontier to tap into. But you have to ask, how did this even happen? How was nature made cheap? It wasn't just about showing up with armies. It actually required brand new ways of seeing, of measuring, and of mapping the world. A whole new toolkit to make the web of life readable or legible to capital.
Moore gives this a name too: abstract social nature. You can think of it as the intellectual operating system for the whole project of cheap nature. It's all about taking the messy, tangled reality of the world and simplifying it down to numbers on a spreadsheet, lines on a map, or resources that can be quantified, managed, and ultimately profited from.
And this process of abstraction has been powering up for centuries. Back in the 1500s, the Mercator map didn't just show the world, it created a new, commercially useful version of the world. Then you get the metric system, which standardizes space and makes everything interchangeable. And now, today, with satellites and genetic mapping, we can account for the planet's resources on a scale that's just mind-boggling.
So when you put all these pieces together, the end of the nature/society split, the engine of cheap nature, and the tools of abstraction, it leads to a direct challenge to a word we hear all the time now: the Anthropocene, the age of humans. But based on this theory, is that really the right way to put it?
Moore makes the case for a different term, the Capitalocene. And this slide shows the difference so clearly. The Anthropocene story tends to blame humanity as a whole, and it usually starts the clock around the Industrial Revolution. But the Capitalocene story says, no, wait a second, it's not our species, it's a specific system for organizing life, capitalism. And its destructive logic didn't start with the steam engine. It started way back around 1450 with the first global frontiers of cheap nature.
And that brings us right up to today. For 500 years, capitalism has expanded by finding new frontiers, getting a kind of free ride from cheap nature.
But what happens when you start running out of frontiers? What happens when all those unpaid bills finally come due?
One of the wildest signs that we're at a tipping point is that nature itself seems to be pushing back, and it's doing it faster and faster. The source calls it Darwinian evolution in fast forward. All these attempts to simplify and control ecosystems are triggering responses that are more and more unpredictable, like superweeds.
And here's what that looks like on the ground. These are weeds that have literally evolved to survive our most powerful herbicides. Just look at this number. 60 million acres of U.S. farmland are now infested. This isn't just some small problem. This is a full-on biological revolt against a system of farming that was designed for maximum control. Nature is adapting faster than we are.
And what this all means is that the costs are suddenly shooting up everywhere. Farmers are paying up to 5 times more for chemicals, sometimes turning to even more toxic stuff just to keep pace. At the exact same time, climate change is hammering crop yields, and the cost of just getting basic energy and raw materials is skyrocketing. The entire system was built on this foundational assumption of an endless supply of cheap stuff from nature, and that assumption is falling apart. The free ride is well and truly over.
And so that leaves us with this final, massive question. If the entire logic of capitalism for its whole 500-year history has relied on this relentless pursuit of cheap nature, what on earth happens to that system in a world where suddenly nothing is cheap anymore? It's a pretty profound thought, and it completely reframes how we might think about our future.